This happened back in 2022. At the time, I was living in the Bay Area, specifically in Oakland, and I had driven up to visit my parents in Eureka for the weekend. If you've never taken Highway 101 along the Northern California coast, it's absolutely beautiful during the day, but at night, it turns into something else entirely. Long, empty stretches of road, no other cars, no cell service, and barely any lights. It feels unsettling. I left my parents' house around 8 p.m. on a Sunday, which, looking back, was a bad decision. I should have stayed the night and driven back Monday morning, but I had an early shift and thought I'd just get the drive over with. Looking back now, that was a mistake. The first couple of hours were completely normal. The road had narrowed down to a 2-lane highway by that point, which is how most of rural 101 is once you get north of the Bay Area. Everything felt fine until I reached somewhere around Trinidad. That's when the fog started coming in. Fog in that area isn't unusual, but this wasn't normal fog. Within about 5 minutes, visibility went from completely clear to barely being able to see 20 feet in front of my car. It was worse than I can even describe. I slowed down to around 35 miles per hour and kept going. The smarter choice would have been to pull over and wait it out, but there aren't many places to stop along that stretch. And honestly, I just wanted to get home. I figured if I drove carefully, I'd be okay. But here's the thing about fog that thick, and anyone who's driven in California knows this. It completely messes with your sense of space. You can't see landmarks, you can't judge distance, and you have no idea what's ahead of you. It's extremely disorienting, especially when you're already tired. After driving like that for about another half hour, I noticed something on the side of the road. At first, it just looked like a shape. Just some kind of figure standing on the shoulder maybe 50 feet ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was a person. A man. Judging by his height, he was just standing there, facing the road. He wasn't moving, he wasn't waving for help. He didn't look like he was on his phone either. He was just standing there. I slowed down even more as I passed him because I was worried he might suddenly step into the road. But he didn't move at all. He didn't even turn his head to look at my car as I went by, which honestly felt really unsettling. I got a decent look at him, and there was nothing obviously strange about his face. My first thought was that maybe his car had broken down somewhere nearby, and he was waiting for help. That would have made sense, except I hadn't seen any cars pulled over, and there was no reason for him to be standing exactly where he was, facing that direction. There was nothing there. I briefly considered turning around to ask if he needed help, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me, so I kept driving. About 10 minutes later, though, I saw him again. I'm not exaggerating. It was the same man, same build, same dark clothing, same exact posture standing on the side of the road. The only difference was that this time he was on the left side instead of the right. Everything else was identical. I actually said, "What the hell?" out loud to myself, because there was no possible way he could have gotten ahead of me. I was the only car on the road. There were no intersections, no side roads, no shortcuts. The only explanation I could come up with was that it was a different person who just happened to look exactly like him and was standing in the exact same strange way. I didn't want to look at him this time, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know. As I passed him, I looked, and I was absolutely certain it was the same guy. But this time, something was different. As I drove by, he suddenly locked eyes with me. I immediately looked away. The way his head turned so quickly to meet my gaze, it was disturbing. I instantly regretted making eye contact. I pressed harder on the gas. Not too much because of the fog, but enough to put some distance between me and whatever that was. I got up to around 45, but then the fog got even worse. I could barely see the center line anymore, so I had no choice but to slow back down. At that point, I was struggling to think clearly between being tired, dealing with the fog, and what I had just experienced. My brain felt overloaded. I kept trying to come up with a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. Then, less than 3 minutes later, my headlights revealed something ahead. There was another person, but this time, he was standing in the middle of the road. I had no choice but to stop, and I did. This time, he was wearing a hood that covered his face, so I couldn't see what he looked like. But I had a strong feeling it was the same man. Once again, he didn't move. That's when I started to feel real fear. We were just sitting there, facing each other. Even though I couldn't see his face, I could feel him staring at me. I didn't know what to do. I flashed my high beams at him multiple times, trying to get him to react or move out of the way. Nothing. I put the car into reverse. When I looked into my rearview mirror, my heart dropped. There was someone behind me. A person was slowly walking toward my car from the back. I yelled, "Holy shit!" and immediately put the car back into drive. I was completely boxed in, but at that point, I didn't care. This was a real threat. I turned sharply to the right, crossing into the opposite lane to get around the person blocking the road. He didn't move. I thought I had made it, but then something slammed into the back of my car. Not a small hit. It was hard. The entire back of my car jerked violently to the side, and I heard a loud crunching sound, like metal being crushed. I somehow managed to keep control of the car and kept driving. At that moment, I thought I had been hit by another vehicle, but when I checked my mirrors, there was nothing there. Nothing at all. No car, no people, nothing, as if everything had just disappeared. That made everything even worse. I didn't stop. I drove as fast as I safely could through the fog. Eventually, I reached the 101 interchange, and the fog started to clear. For the first time in a while, I felt my mind begin to calm down. And as I started thinking about everything that had just happened, I came to a conclusion. As strange as it sounds, I convinced myself that I had hallucinated everything. I had been driving for almost 4 hours. I was exhausted. I had been staring into thick fog for a long time, completely alone on a dark highway. A vivid hallucination didn't seem impossible. It didn't explain everything, but it was the only explanation I had. By the time I got home, I just wanted to go to sleep and forget the entire experience, but then I walked to the back of my car, and everything changed. The rear bumper was completely damaged. There was a huge dent across almost the entire width. Whatever had hit me had hit hard. That meant it actually happened. I stood there staring at it for several minutes. There was no paint transfer. If another car had hit me, there would have been. So if it wasn't another car, then what was it? I did end up calling the police to report everything, mostly just to document it. Over the past 4 years, I've thought about that night more times than I can count. I've gone over every possible explanation, and the conclusion I've settled on is this. Maybe I hallucinated the figures, and in my panic I hit something like a guardrail or a post. That would explain the damage. But there's one thing I still can't fully accept. Hallucinating one thing while simultaneously experiencing something real doesn't sit right with me. And the fact that my car was actually damaged has always made me feel like there was something more going on that night. This took place during this past spring break, so it's very recent. Just a few weeks ago. I'm currently in college, a senior, and like I usually do, I went back to my hometown for the break. The issue with going back home, though, is that there's honestly nothing to do there. It's one of those suburban towns that's technically near a city, but doesn't actually have any of the advantages of being in one. No nightlife, no bars, nothing within walking distance. At school, I'm always busy with something, but back home it feels completely dead. On top of that, none of my hometown friends had the same spring break schedule. I still keep in touch with maybe 4 or 5 people from high school, but every single one of them was either still in classes or had already taken their break earlier in March. So I was basically stuck with an entire week of doing nothing, which I really wasn't looking forward to. I should also mention that I've been trying to cut back on certain habits, mainly nicotine and alcohol. I figured being home for a week with nothing to do could either make things worse or actually help me reset. So I made a plan. I decided I'd work out every day, lifting weights in the morning and going for runs in the afternoon, just to keep myself occupied and stay out of my own head. That's how I ended up going for a run on a random Tuesday afternoon. I remembered this loop I used to run back when I did cross country in high school. It's exactly 3 miles long, starting and ending at my house. The route goes through my neighborhood for about a quarter mile, then cuts into a wooded trail that winds through a small forest before bringing you back out onto the street about a block away from home. I must have run that loop hundreds, maybe even 1,000 times between freshman and senior year. The best part of it is the woods. Running on pavement destroys your knees, but the dirt trail is softer. Plus it's quiet, something I really value when I run. I headed out around 5 p.m. The sun wasn't going down for a couple more hours, so visibility wasn't something I was worried about. But the moment I stepped outside, I noticed something strange. The fog. I don't really know how to describe it, other than saying it was unusually thick. I've lived in that town my whole life and never seen fog like that before. It almost looked artificial, like something out of a video game or one of those ambient lo-fi videos with the anime girls studying. Anything beyond 30 or 40 feet just disappeared into haze. I thought about skipping the run, but I convinced myself to go anyway. The trail is straightforward, just one path, no forks or splits. I've run it so many times I felt like I could do it blindfolded. Getting lost didn't seem possible. I had my Garmin watch on to track distance and pace. I started running, did the short stretch through my neighborhood, and entered the woods. The fog was even thicker inside, probably because the trees blocked out the remaining daylight. I could only see about 15 to 20 feet ahead, but the trail was still easy to follow. For the first mile and a half, everything felt normal. I was running a bit slower than usual because of the limited visibility, but nothing too concerning. I remember checking my watch at the 1 mile mark, then again at 1.5. Things started getting strange around the 2.5 mile mark. At that point in the loop, I should have been nearing the end of the trail. The path curves left, goes slightly uphill, and then you're back on pavement. I know that part by heart. Honestly, I know every part by heart. But when I looked at my watch and saw 2.5 miles, I was still deep in the woods. I assumed my watch was glitching. It was about 4 years old, so I figured the GPS might be struggling because of the tree coverage. Maybe the fog was interfering too. That all sounded reasonable enough, so I kept running. Then I passed 3 miles. That's when I knew something wasn't right. The loop is exactly 3 miles. At that distance, I should have been home, or at least back on the street. Instead, I was still surrounded by trees, still on the same dirt path, with no sign of an exit. So I stopped running. I'm not someone who gets paranoid easily, and I'm not superstitious. There had to be a logical explanation. I tried to catch my breath and think it through, but nothing made sense. There's only one trail. No forks. No alternate paths. The only way I could have gotten lost is if I had stepped off the trail and gone into the brush, which I definitely hadn't done. I checked my watch again. 3.1 miles. The number kept increasing even though I was standing still, which confirmed the GPS was malfunctioning. That was the only part of this that made any sense. At that point, I had two choices: keep going forward and hope I eventually found the exit, or turn around and retrace my steps. Turning back seemed like the smarter option. If I went back the way I came, I'd eventually reach the trailhead, and from there, I knew exactly how to get home. So I turned around and started running back. The fog had somehow gotten even worse. I had to slow down just to make sure I stayed on the path. After about a mile of running, so roughly 4 miles total, I heard something. Like I said before, the woods are usually completely silent, probably because the area is too small for many animals. So hearing any noise at all was unsettling. But the sound itself was far worse. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. The closest way I can describe it is a moan. But that's not quite accurate. It was deeper than that, more like a low drone that fluctuated. It would rise, then fall, then rise again, almost like a siren, but human. It sounded completely wrong. It didn't sound like someone asking for help, and it didn't sound like someone in pain either. It was just this continuous, wavering noise with no clear purpose. I started running faster, but by that point, I had already run over 4 miles. I was exhausted. I could only go so fast, and the more I pushed myself, the more tired and scared I became. The sound didn't stop. No matter how fast I ran, whatever was making that noise seemed to be matching my pace. I kept glancing over my shoulder multiple times, but I couldn't see anything, just fog. It felt like this went on forever. I didn't have a choice but to keep running. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I finally made it out of the woods. I stumbled onto the street, completely exhausted, and almost threw up. The fog was still incredibly thick, even outside. I turned around to look back at the trail, and that's when I saw it. There was something standing in the middle of the path, just a short distance inside the trailhead. I say something because I genuinely don't know what else to call it. It was just a shape, a dark silhouette, like a solid mass. It was much taller than me, and I'm 6'1". This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall. It didn't move toward me or away from me. It just stood there, watching me. I could feel it. If it hadn't been slightly swaying back and forth, I might have thought it was a tree or something. The sound had stopped by then, but I didn't care. I turned around and ran home without looking back. That happened a few weeks ago. I'm back at school now, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. That image, the black figure in the fog, and that horrible sound won't leave my mind. I told my parents everything. They both think it was probably just a tall person trying to scare me or maybe attack me, which I guess is possible. But I don't believe that. There's no way a person could make that kind of sound while running and keeping up with me. And the height, too. I don't know what was in those woods that night. And honestly, I don't think I ever will.